Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Please take a moment to click those icons on the screen, the thumb, the subscribe, and the bell. We appreciate it.
So, if you're new to this channel, each week, Todd, Leonard, and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming weekend's lectionary reading from the Gospels. And our goal is to talk about those passages in the context of love and inclusion and social justice. Our hope is that our talking will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something we might say during this time would inspire you, along with us, to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what are we looking at this week?
We need to add something to that description when you give our description of what just talking is about to say what we hope people get out of it when it's from the Gospel of John. Because
um,
we have I mean,
we have
yes,
two
we
more
still
weeks with
hope.
John.
Yeah, we still hope that people somehow get a motivation for justice out of the Gospel of John. But clearly, it the
John's a stretch.
our tone, and our yes, and our struggle. The struggle is real when we're discussing John. And this week we are still. I mean, it's not just we're still in John. We're still in John 6.
It's a whole month
John
in John 6. Who wrote the
John
lectionary for crying out
6.
loud?
50, I know, 51 through 58. So yeah. And
It's
I'm
much
just
easier to see Jesus and social justice connections in the synoptics.
yep.
I think we've proven that.
Yep. So I'm just going to turn off my mic and turn it over to Herb.
Don't do that, man. I'm counting on you this week. So
Oh, maybe I'll chime in.
this is John's nod to the bread and the wine. There is no real bread and cup in John chapter 13 where we have the Last Supper. It's a unique story in that Mark, Matthew, and Luke have, the breaking of the bread, the blessing of the cup, and the passing of it around, and all of that sharing, and Jesus's words about his body and his blood, the blood of the covenant, all that stuff. We get to John and we have the Last Supper, and none of that happens. All that happens is that Jesus in John 13, Jesus picks up the basin and the towel and
Mhm.
washes their feet. There is no discourse on bread and wine at all. So some scholars of John think that John chapter 6, specifically the verses we're looking at this week, is where the author of John or the Johannine community is kind of giving a nod to
Mhm.
that tradition among the Christian church. And this is where Jesus talks about eating his flesh, drinking his blood. Those that do that will have eternal life. He'll raise them at the last day. For my flesh is real food and my blood is real drink. There it is again. And we've talked about this so much this month. The belittling of the material and the lifting up of the exalting of the spiritual.
Mhm.
The spiritual here is the real stuff.
Mhm.
Whoever eats my flesh, drinks my blood, remains in me, and I in them. This is the bread that came down from heaven. Your ancestors ate the manna and died. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. So, so yeah, this is this is the only place where the drinking of the blood and eating of the bread and the flesh and all that makes an appearance in the Gospel of John, John chapter 6.
Yeah. So, can we refresh ourselves um and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, Herb, on where
No, it's good.
you uh are going. In the synoptic accounts of the Last Supper, um, Jesus shares bread and wine, and there is discussion about Judas's betrayal.
Mhm.
Um, what is mentioned about the bread and the wine in the synoptics? Uh, and,
Judas's betrayal is still mentioned very much so in John.
mm-hmm.
It's just not around it's in the foot washing ceremony rather than
Right,
the right.
right.
So and there's two versions. There's two kind of liturgical versions of the bread and cup. One offers the cup, and again, it's been so long since I've looked at the synoptics, but I think one offers the cup first and the bread second,
Mm-hmm.
or vice versa. It's either bread first and cup second, but I think it's cup first and bread second. And that one's Mark's version. Then Matthew gives a different version, and then Luke combines both versions. So what you have is like cup bread, then cup again, which makes no sense. But
Yeah,
it was,
yeah.
but again, what the Gospels are doing is they're trying to, however, the Last Supper was memorialized and ritualized among early Jesus followers. They're casting a big tent with these gospel accounts,
Mm-hmm.
and it's for
Mm-hmm.
however they describe it in the Gospels. However, the community itself is practicing it, right?
And I think again that right there is such an important point. Is what we're getting at is to whatever extent there was an actual Last Supper that Jesus actually had with his disciples, what we're seeing in the gospel accounts is not necessarily what historically took place. Is we are seeing what was most likely being practiced, or
By
the
the communities,
or
yeah.
the most commonly practiced elements of what was being practiced in those communities of the synoptics
Yeah,
at
the
the
communities for
time
whom
of the
those
writing.
gospels were written for,
Right.
they're
And I
they're
think
going to lift up that practice.
right. And I think again it's just the same thing as when you go to the letter of First Corinthians and you go to chapter 11, and the writer there addressing and disciplining the people about how they're hoarding and not equitably distributing. That's addressing how the church in Corinth at the time of the writing of that letter is handling their practice of communion at that time, rather than a universal practice of communion for all time, or having anything to do with what the communion looked like when Jesus, if Jesus historically did it, what that looked like.
So the two earliest accounts of this practice among early Christians, both of them predate the gospel accounts. And the one of them is the one you just mentioned, the one in First Corinthians 11, where
Mm-hmm.
the language is very clear there. This is my body, which is for you. And this is the cup, the new covenant in my blood. And by eating the bread and drinking this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So it's connected to uh, memorializing Jesus's death, the body and the blood, the dying. But you're making reference, and there are some in this context too, of the meal itself being supposed to be kind of an act of resource sharing or mutual aid,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And Paul's rebuke is to those that are being gluttonous. Some remain hungry, another gets drunk. He says to those who are going to be gluttonous,
I just
basically,
love there. I just want to say, Herb, I love at that moment where you said gluttonous,
I burped.
you had a little burp. I thought
Yeah,
that was,
I'm
and I
drinking
know,
water, so I had a water
and I
burp.
know you didn't actually burp because you're above that. What you did was that's acting. And I just wanted to point that out, that
Sure.
this is what you bring every week, and
Yeah,
I
I just wanted
appreciate
to
that.
illustrate the text.
Thank you, thank you.
Want it to feel real.
I just think that people don't always recognize the subtlety of the work that you do. So I just wanted to bring that up. Now, I'm sorry. Please continue.
It is subtle. Thanks, Todd. Um, no. So he tells them, if you're hungry, eat before you show up. Which to me, I don't think he's saying it to the actual members of the Jesus community who don't have enough food to eat.
Right.
I think he's saying that to those who have more than enough, and yet they're showing up and eating all the food at the meal. So he's like, dude, if you're hungry, eat before you show up.
Right.
This is supposed to be a time where resources are shared among the community, kind of that Acts 2 model.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
where there's no needy person or no hungry person among them kind of idea. But what I think is most fascinating, and I'm going to give a lot of credit this week to John Dominic Crossan's book, The Historical Jesus, The Life of a Mediterranean Jewish Peasant.
Mm-hmm.
He has got an entire section in this book where he points out 5 possible evolutionary stages that the Eucharist went through.
Mm-hmm.
And what he points out, well, first, before we even get to the Last Supper or the Lord's Supper or a cup and the bread and all of that, he does a really good job showing how bread and wine was shorthand. It was kind of like a colloquial term
Mm-hmm.
of a formal meal within Greek and Roman society.
Ah.
Bread and wine, that's what they called a formal meal, a collective
Okay.
meal, a special
Okay.
meal. We're going to have bread and wine together. And it had no connection to Jesus whatsoever.
Hmm.
So then the gospel community picks up this, just like they did with the term. We've talked about this before, just like they took the term the gospel and
Mm-hmm.
took it out of Roman culture and,
Yep.
applied it to Jesus's gospel, Jesus's kingdom versus the empire.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing the same thing here. They're taking the bread and wine, which bread and wine was a Roman colloquialism. They're
Mm-hmm.
taking the bread and wine and they're saying, no, the Christian bread and wine is when we share our resources together
Mm-hmm.
and when we, make sure there's no hungry person. But it evolved over time to take on the symbol of Christ's body and Christ's blood, the bread and the wine. But what I was trying to get to originally, what I find most interesting is the reference to a parallel, possibly. I don't want to say it comes before the one we read in Paul, but it could at least be a contemporary practice among early Christians. It was a way of celebrating the bread and wine during the same time period. And we find it in the Didache, which was a kind of like an early church manual, the
Mm-hmm.
teachings of the apostles, kind of early church
Yep.
manual written around the same time as the earliest books of the New Testament. And this is chapter 9, and it talks about the cup and the bread. And notice what it says, and I'm reading directly from it. It says, first, concerning the cup. This is early church manual. This is how they were to celebrate the feast, the
Mm-hmm.
Lord's Supper. This is what they were to pray. We give thee thanks, our Father, for the holy vine of David thy child, which thou didst make known to us through Jesus thy child. To thee be glory forever and ever. So
Hmm.
drinking of the wine is talking about the grape juice, which comes from the grape, which comes from the vine, to which they had been grafted into this covenantal community through
Hmm.
Jesus, the vine of
Okay.
David. And
Yeah.
then it says, and concerning the broken bread, we give thee thanks, our Father, for the life and knowledge which thou didst make known to us through Jesus thy child. To thee be glory forever and ever. So it's about life and knowledge, like bread, how the teachings of Jesus give us life in the same way that the
Mm-hmm.
bread gives us Jesus, or gives us life. What I find fascinating about this is at the time period this would have been written down as a church manual, as instruction on to how
Mm-hmm.
the bread and wine are to be served in the community during this meal. There is no mention of a broken body or spilt blood. There's
Hmm.
no connection here of the
That's
bread
true.
and wine to the body and blood of Jesus.
That's true.
And I find that fascinating.
Yeah.
For those of
Yeah,
us
that
who
is.
have deep problems with different atonement theories like penal
Right.
substitutionary atonement, this is helpful. There's a way to
Yeah.
celebrate the Lord's Supper without it being about blood and violence.
It's interesting. It is interesting that there is that grafting into the vine imagery that we do find in John.
Hmm?
That's interesting. Of course, John comes much later than it did okay. So, but obviously there is that. It's interesting that that kind of imagery has already it might the vineyard imagery of the people of God being part of God's vine has been around for a long time, and so it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that um, well, help me here, Herb. Is when the Didache is written, are we still looking at a primarily Jewish expression of Christianity at this point? Or we're
I
seeing
I
Gentile?
think we are. I mean, it's a church manual for the Jewish Christians.
Yeah.
And there may be some Gentile, this is, what you do with Gentile Christians in there, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still primarily a Jewish flavor because the
Mm-hmm.
language here, even with the cup, we give thee thanks, our Father, for the holy vine of David,
David.
thy
Right.
child. You know what I mean? So it's
That's
still got that
that.
Jewish
Yeah.
overtone to it.
Very much so. Yeah.
Where Paul is now talking to, and you bringing that up, I don't know if this is true, but it would make sense. Paul ministering to Gentiles,
Mm-hmm.
he's going to move away from the
Of
Jewish
course.
expression, the Jewish lens, interpretive lens of the bread
Yep.
and the wine, right? And he's going to
Yep.
apply it just directly to Jesus and Jesus is
Mm-hmm.
dying and the body and the blood. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no mention of David or any of that grafting or any of that stuff now.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So it's just fascinating. And they were just as much Christian. I mean, we argue over how to do the Eucharist in some circles today in Christianity, but these guys they were following their church manual
Yeah.
within the Christian tradition. And there's no reference in the cup or the bread to body and blood at
Hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not in chapter 9.
Yeah.
I find that it harkens back to the Acts 2 model,
Yeah.
where they broke bread in their homes together every day and they shared their resources with one another, their food with one another. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we're creating a kind of community where they made sure nobody was hungry, nobody had need,
Yeah. Yeah.
and even when they prayed over the bread and the cup, symbolizing Jesus's table practice, this inclusive table practice by Jesus, it's about being grafted into the vine and having this life and knowledge that comes through the bread
Yeah.
of Jesus. It's just very, very different, very different.
Yeah. And I like the idea of uh and I think for people who say, and again, I hear this is such common language in so many evangelical congregations about if you if you don't receive the sacrifice of Christ symbolized through
Right.
the bread and wine, the body and blood of Christ, you have no part of Christ. But in the Didache, you are seeing, no, we are eating these things. They don't symbol. We're not. They don't. We don't have a comprehension. I'm saying this parenthetically. We
Right.
don't
Right.
have a comprehension of them representing anything other than we are. This meal together tells us that as we are gathered together and belong to one another, so too do we belong to Christ. So
Right.
too do we
Right.
belong. We belong to Jesus and to the mission of Jesus. And so there
Through
is
the
a
community.
through the community. So we belong. This is how we belong to one another, by fellowshipping, by sharing, by this mutuality and interdependence. This is how we belong to one another. This is what Jesus taught us, and this is how we belong. And that is how. And frankly, I mean, this is. I know you could say the same thing, Herb. This is so true to my experience. Is my spiritual, my real spiritual connection to Christ now is so much through the connection I have through other people.
Sure.
There is something, there's the bond, the, and the amazing thing about in my role as a chaplain right now is it can happen in a 25-minute visit with someone I've never met before, which is so profound. But there's this some common connection, this empathy about shared moment of having gone through something similar, facing something similar, and finding common ground in some way with somebody you've never met before, and you say, no, we we belong together,
Mm,
and somehow we belong in God together,
mm-hmm.
and uh, and it's so profound when you find that,
Yeah.
and
One
that
of,
and that's what's and that's what you're saying you see in the Didache in the earliest in this earliest expression of what this important ritual was trying to communicate.
yeah, and I know we rag on the Johannine community a bit when it gets pretty spiritual and it, gets ethereal. But there is, in the other books of John, there is the question asked, how can you love God who you haven't seen when
Mm-hmm.
you don't love your brother and sister that you have seen, that you
Yeah,
can see, that are right in front of you, right?
yeah.
And what that communicates to me, this is one of the places where the Johannine community, I think, gets it right, is right
Mm-hmm.
here, is the
Mm-hmm.
closest that either one of us is going to come to God in this life is interacting with one another,
That's right.
because each one of us bears the image of God, right? So
That's
the
right.
closest I come to, every human being bears the image of God. Therefore, the closest I'm going to come to God is through other human beings in
Mm-hmm.
community,
Mm-hmm.
how we relate to those we can see.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's what we see happening here in the early church, and it harkens back to those stories of the fish and the bread, the feeding of the multitudes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
and these the way that Jesus ate with people in different social locations,
Yes.
whether they were centrally empowered or whether they were marginalized and pushed to the edges. His table fellowship, the way Jesus practiced, and I'm not using this in the Christian term, I'm using this in the Romans term. The way that Jesus practiced bread and wine was
Yes.
radically inclusive.
Yes.
His meals were radically inclusive when you only ate with the people that belonged to your social location. So again, it harkens back to that. And I have a hunch, and again, I haven't looked at this, but I bet you it'll bear out that part of the evolution of a shared meal, which I think, I don't know, you grew up with these two in your evangelical background, the agape
Yes.
suppers that were
Mm-hmm.
actually, we still did communion, but we had kind of a supper around it as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think they were trying to get back to some of this in that, but I can see that it started out as a meal where we made sure everybody was fed, everybody had food, because it's a
Mm-hmm.
big
Mm-hmm.
ticket item in the early Jesus community, is being able to eat. It was a
Yes.
movement of peasants and poor people.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then and this is the part that I don't know that if it bears out, but I bet it does. If we could take a closer look at it, as the social location of the church changes
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes less a movement on the margins and becomes
Mm-hmm.
populated with people of means,
Mm-hmm.
we gravitate away from the mutual aid and resource sharing because it's not necessarily needed. It's no longer a movement
Right.
of the impoverished that are pooling their resources together. Now you have people that can read and write down the gospels even.
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming more affluent. And
Mm-hmm.
so I can see why celebrating the Lord's Supper evolved away from mutual aid
Yeah.
into these symbols that
Mm-hmm.
in 2 millennia, I mean, 2,000 years have gone by. Now they're just a little cracker and a little tiny little juice cup.
Yep. Yep.
And that's Jesus's body and blood. But we've completely, in those two symbols, we've completely lost
Yes.
the imagery of a meal that's shared to end world hunger.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Snack size Jesus isn't going to make anybody feel full.
No. And hmm. Awkward pause. I feel reflective after you said that. I actually I don't have something to add, but it's a reflective moment. Yeah.
I just think that we have so much theology now in Christian history and the Christian church around the dying of Jesus. We have so much theology around that in debate and argumentation. And it's so easy for the way we celebrate the Eucharist today to be only about that singular event. And
Hmm.
I find it encouraging that the original purpose of this ritual was for it to actually be a shared meal rather than just memorializing Jesus' dying.
And a shared meal based upon the ministry that
Yes,
Jesus
in the
lived that
context.
brought people together who had no chance of being brought together in the existing power structure, but in but with Jesus they were brought together. And so they are part they are part of a community that would not exist unless Jesus had brought them together. And this is they are they are celebrating something that is um, that has transformed their status as people. They now understand themselves as people of God. They did not understand themselves. They were told in so many ways, with so many different insults and by so many exclusionary practices, that they were not children of God, even if they were born and bred as, and were told that because of their Jewish birthright, that Jewish people were the children of God. They were then told because they were not blessed financially, or they were not part of the political establishment, or they did not serve, whatever the reason was, or because they had a disease, or because they were queer, or because they whatever, or they were a woman, or they were different, or they had a mixed ancestry, that they were not children of God. And Jesus comes and says to all of them, "You
Welcome
belong
to the
with me.
table.
You get to eat at the table, bread and wine.
Yeah,
You get to have a fancy meal. You
yeah, the formal
get to
meal.
have the formal meal with me."
Yeah, yeah. That's pretty special.
Yeah,
To me, that resonates way more than just a little juice cup.
yeah.
That's pretty special.
And let's talk about the way we see communion served in most churches. It is such a sober, solemn, lifeless, and I have no problem with ritual, but I use the term ritual in this context of very perfunctory, performative uh, behavior
Yeah, I
that
love I love ritual because ritual is a practice that's supposed to shape us, right?
correct.
But you're
But
talking about
this
something ritualized.
ritualized and ritualistic, that is simply done because it's supposed to be done. and there is rarely do I see in it, uh, in the practice of it, the celebratory and, um, I guess, I mean, I guess
It's
celebratory,
just
but
too
I might,
stiff.
yeah, and just the sense of belongingness that comes with having of that this is this joyous moment. I mean, I guess I'm thinking Thanksgiving dinner in a healthy, functional family where it's like we're all home again with grandma's cooking and we all get along and nobody's going to have a drunken episode at the table and we all get along, and we're all happy and it's like we're home. And there and that in the that there's this communion gathering where people of different races, cultures, of come together, and in the sharing of this meal, we feel this deep connection to home. That this is we this is really where we feel the most belonging because we're brought together in this magnificent community that exists in no other place than where
The
when we're
family.
united with the mission of radical inclusion and welcome and this only happens here. There's none of that in our communion service. It's very in the head.
Yeah. I'm thinking of two examples in my head. Well, one of them is a very formal, high liturgical, you know, Eucharist ritual where only the approved are serving or standing behind
Mm-hmm.
the table and allowed to bless or touch the bread or
Mm-hmm.
bless the bread. Um, you know, uh, uh, and what that serves to what that tends to do is just drive home once again a sense of hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
of difference between me and them, that they're way above
Mm-hmm.
me. There's not a
Mm-hmm.
connectedness there. There's a separation that's emphasized in that way of
That's right.
serving the meal, where you see the difference. That person serving, they are other than me. I'm not worthy enough, right?
That's right.
And
That's
then
right.
I think of the other way that I have in my head is the example of two friends of mine who are pastors within the LGBTQ community. Um, and they go to pride parades and they stand there with, like when you go to a baseball game or a sporting event and they walk around with these kind of
Yeah.
trays that have the straps with the
Yeah.
peanuts or the
Yeah.
whatever in it, right? Well, they walk around with those, but they have the little juice cups and the crackers in them,
Yeah.
and they go around offering communion to all the LGBTQ people that'll take it,
Yeah.
and the tears that are shed for those who do, the tears that are shed and the stories that are shared of
Mm.
religious faith communities that these people grew up in and how they were barred, they weren't allowed from even partaking in this
Mm-hmm.
meal anymore
Mm-hmm.
or in this ritual anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone to offer them something as simple as communion
Yeah.
to a queer person of faith that
Mm-hmm.
hasn't had that in as long as they can remember,
Yeah.
that is a totally different meaning that's being communicated there. That's more,
Yes.
even though it's just crackers and snack size Jesus, still it
Correct.
still is
Correct.
returning back to the original meaning of the
Yes.
feast.
Yes. And in a pride parade where it's festive and joyous,
Yeah.
that and again for a person who again, let's please do away with the myth that somebody who's out as an LGBTQ person is does not want to be a follower of Christ is such a horrible.
No, the best Christians I know are LGBTQ
I
Christians.
exactly. And so for somebody at a pride parade who has finally made peace with and is celebrating who God has made them, uh, then to then not only celebrate their integrated personhood, but then to come to the table by taking the bread and the
I mean, to
wine.
have a
And
clergy member
yeah,
who also belongs to the LGBTQ
yes,
community
yes,
show
yes,
up and
yes,
offer them, who have been barred by straight Christians
yes,
from partaking in this ceremony, this
yes.
ritual, to have that offered to them, it's more healing than I think straight people can get their heads around.
That's right. That's right. And you and I
And
have
not for
both
everybody, but for people of faith.
correct. And you and I both have been in another setting where we've seen LGBTQ people serve one another communion and have seen the tears shed and the joy.
It's
Uh,
moving.
it's powerful. And
There's
so
a
yeah,
sense of
there
it has nothing to do, honestly, and this
it
might
has
get me
nothing
in
to do with
trouble.
John 6. It has nothing to do with
It
John 6.
doesn't. It has everything to do with community and belonging and worthiness.
Yeah.
That you have immeasurable worth. That's what
You've
it's
been grafted
communicating.
into the vine. You've
Yeah,
been grafted
yeah,
into the vine of belonging.
yeah. It's that Didache stuff again.
Yeah.
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 So more of that, please. Can we have more of that? Can we have more of that
Yes.
kind of Eucharist?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Can I have some more? Please, sir, may I have some more? All right, what else you got this week, Todd? Anything?
Um, no.
All right. Well, I hope this was at least affirming, but maybe even insightful. Maybe someone out there like me wasn't aware of the early history of how Eucharist was practiced in different ways. So yeah, I hope that's a blessing. It is to me. It sets me free in a couple of my hangups.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, and so I would say I would encourage you, and if you are a clergy person who's watching this, obviously in the context of your denomination, your faith community, I know that often the celebration of communion comes with a lot of tradition uh,
Expectation.
and expectations, and I don't mean this necessarily in a pejorative way, but baggage. But where you feel your congregation or maybe a portion of your congregation would be open to trying something that might look a little bit closer to a uh, a bread and wine celebration. Um, I would just just encourage you to lean into that. Maybe just invite some people over to your house. Just I mean, sometimes you as a pastor kind of know who some of those people are, and just and I would say even just for your own soul, even be a little selfish as a pastor and just say maybe even just for your own soul. Um, because I can say for me, communion was always it was really important to me, um, and so to have the opportunity to feel that grafted connection, or to do something like what Herb mentioned, and to take communion to a pride parade or to a homeless shelter or um,
Or to
something
shut in.
to shut-ins to hospital. Just to remind people who are feeling disconnected from Christ and disconnected from people, and you get to be that reconnecting person. Just remind let this ritual that too often becomes ritualistic become this magnificent portal back into what it was originally intended to be.
And if you are, if you do belong, if you are a clergy that does belong to a community that has a very fixed way of going through this service or going through this ritual, maybe in addition to that, at a different time, you
Hmm.
could have a communal meal where
Hmm.
everybody comes together and just celebrates the being part of the community, and
Yeah,
experiment with
have
that.
some good
Have
wine and toast one another. Toast to the kingdom of God. Toast to
yeah, something
belonging
that's
together.
yeah, something that's kind of the dedicate. Have a dedicate ritual that
Yeah.
way. And it doesn't, you don't have to threaten, you don't have to get fired. You don't have to threaten to change the way the other is done, right? Just do
Right.
this in addition
Exactly.
to,
That's right.
there
That's right.
may be
Yeah.
some good things that come out of that.
Yeah. Hmm.
All right, man.
Yeah. Glad we did this. It's good for me. So
Me too.
um, so thanks to everybody who supports Renewed Heart Ministries. We're grateful for you, and just encourage you to visit Herb's website at renewedheartministries.com. Make sure you're getting his resources both online and print, and connecting with his podcasts. If you haven't been to Amazon and Kindle to check out his books, please check that out. Finding Jesus. And as always, his ministry is something that is well worth supporting. And if you'd like to make a donation, you can do that also at renewedheartministries.com. So, with that, we wish you all a great week,
Thanks,
and
Todd.
we will see you next week for one more special incursion into John chapter 6. It is worth just watching Herb and I
Is
do
it,
our best to
is it
eat
just one
something
more?
out of it.
Is it just one more? I think it is just one more. Are we
Please
almost
let it
done?
be just one more. Please,
I just
God.
pulled up my calendar. Boom. Oh, I got bad news for you.
Herb, please. I don't know if I can take it.
That's what I was. Oh, no, it is just one more. It's one more because the following weekend we go back to the Gospel of Mark.
Oh,
There's one more.
thank.
We can do it. We can do John chapter 6. It's the longest chapter ever. We can do John chapter 6 one more time, Todd.
All right, man. We'll do it. I'm gonna do some push-ups and sit-ups and get ready for it. So,
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening this week. We'll see you next week.